Haley said to go, so.
Haley says go.
Haley says to go, so we'll get this thing started. So, thank you guys for coming today. My name is Jim Washburn, if you don't know me. I get to introduce Jim Gilligan. He's our guest speaker for the day. Jim has his bachelor's degree was marketing, an MBA in finance. He spent 38 years with a publicly traded utility called Evergy now. It has gone through several mergers and acquisitions over the years. He retired from that, got restless. He now works for MFR Securities, it's an investment banking firm out of New York. But one reason he's here today, well, other than he's just cool and comes to visit us all the time, is that he has, in his time at Evergy, or Great Plains Energy at that time, I guess.
Depending on which merger.
Depending on which merger you're at, Jim was president of a subsidiary that invested in some affordable housing. So some of you are first-year students who are getting evicted. Who all is in the process of getting evicted right now? Okay, they're your evicted people. So,
Ray, keep those up a minute.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pick on you. Okay. From the back.
I think you picked a random to get most of them, yeah. And
Well, you can tell me you don't read the book, and then I'll never know.
yeah, okay. But so he is going to share a little bit of that experience with us, and also if you want to ask him anything else, please feel free. He's got a lot of experience. I always throw in, he's done a lot of cool stuff over his time. He's been quoted by Wall Street Journal and about everybody else. Testified before Congress twice. So he is the resident expert on whatever you got. All right, so I'll turn it over to Jim. Enjoy.
Hi. How are you all? So, would you say they get credit for a speech? This is not a speech. This is a interactive session. So, thanks for letting me come here. Who was in the class this morning that's already seen me once? Yes, and you're in the same seat.
Yes.
Is there anybody, there was one other person that was going to be, they didn't show up. They had enough of me, so it's just you. Okay, so if I say the same thing, don't rat me out. All right, so thank you. I've known Dr. Washa, or Jim, for a very long time. 30 years?
I don't think it's 30, probably 20, 21 years, something like that.
Whatever. So I met him in Minneapolis when he was teaching me how for the CTP accreditation, which is the Certified Treasury Professional accreditation. So no, I remember when I got that. So that would have been in 87.
No, it could have been 87.
88?
No, it had to be. I didn't start working with them until like 86.
87 grades. Yeah, it had to be then. All right, and then there was another guy who was teaching the class with him that we circle around and don't call him our friend anymore, right? He's a strange guy, but he's moved around a lot. Anyway, I've known this guy for a long time, and he says all these nice things about me, so now it's my turn to say all these nice things about him. You have no idea how lucky you are to really be in a small school like this and have somebody like Dr. Washam, who's renowned in our area for his treasury experience and also for his teaching in our profession. So most everybody that's on my side that's a corporate practitioner also knows him. And so you're very lucky. This morning, the business finance class that I talked to, I remember when I went to the University of Missouri, so it was structured it was the mass course for people just beginning in business school. The required finance course was called corporate finance. And I was a teaching assistant when I was in grad school for that class, and it had 800 people in it. So, so there'd be a lecture 2 times a week, and then what was called a lab with a teaching assistant like me to do sort of the technical stuff with students. So, when you have 800 students, it's a little hard to get personal time one-on-one. So you don't know the resource you have here, so leverage it. That's the advantage of being in a small school and having somebody that you're going to hate me. You grew up in Pocahontas, though, right? Didn't you? Yes. So we're gonna talk about different things, and I have no formal presentation. So if I meander off, get me back on track, or if you want to talk about something completely different, that's fine too. But I thought that we would start out because I heard and most of you are reading this book called Evicted. So that gives me some background. I looked at a summary of the book. I admit I didn't have time to read the book since I just learned about it on Friday. But I did read a summary about the book, and I'm curious who wants to be brave and tell me what your impressions are of the book. I'm particularly interested in knowing if it surprises you. You know, maybe I don't know, how far along are you in the book, I should ask. Are you on chapter 1, or are you about done with this thing?
So some of us are still starting it, like they're about halfway through, but then all of us who were in Dr. Chu's class have already actually finished the book.
Okay.
So about half of us have already finished it. And my personal impression of the book, it was a good book. It was kind of complicated, and it really surprised me how much some people really struggle with that, and they're constantly stuck in that system of just cycling.
And why do you say it's complicated?
Because there's so many factors that go into play, so many things, and the world is just so complicated, especially in that if you call the wrong person, your landlord can throw you out, or if you do something a certain way, and sometimes they can get away with leaving things broken, sometimes they can't. It's just a really finicky, detail-oriented world.
I agree. Okay, so I throw that out to you because I think if you look at the book at a high level, it questions a lot of things about our society and what's right and what's wrong. And in an economic, capitalistic country like the United States, what is it that we should do about societal problems like that? Should we tax ourselves and provide free housing, for example, to people? Should we require landlords to lower the rent? Should we give free utilities to people? Should we let them just do whatever? Whatever happens, happens. So, you told everybody, I worked for Evergy for 38 years. So Evergy in the first incarnation when I started there was Kansas City Power and Light Company. So Evergy at the end had, when I left, about 1.8 million customers. Now, 1.8 million customers in the utility business, and the electric utility business does not mean people. That's meters. So one customer is like a house, or it could be one business. So that 1.8 million customers really translates into several million people. When I started at the company, I was a financial analyst, basically. And I differentiated myself so well that after a year and a half, I was offered a promotion that I don't know that I'm so sure was a promotion at the time. But I was put over, at the ripe age of 25, the credit and collection department of Kansas City Power and Light. So you might say, what kind of credit is there in a utility? That's a fair question, because you use electricity and you get billed for it. Whatever you use, you get billed for. And you get billed for it after you use it. But there's a heck of a lot of collection. And the collection part is turning off people's lights if you don't pay their bill. So I've had my fair share of seeing, let's say, distressed individuals coping with life's challenges, including paying their utility bill. And usually not, and I think the book mentions this, that utility disconnections will often drive a lot of evictions, or at least have an impact on people. It may surprise you to know, in fact, there's no penalty for this. I'm expecting a bad guess. What percentage of the customers of a utility would you suspect are delinquent at any one time? At any time? company have not paid their bill on time? It's the same for about all utilities in the United States.
6%.
6%.
35.
35%. Anything else?
25%.
It is 40%. Very good. You gotta give him your sandwiches. 40% of anybody that's a customer of a utility has not paid their bill on time. Isn't that phenomenal? That was the first thing I learned. And why is that? There's, like, it's complicated. There's several reasons. There's people who feel like utilities are a right, and there are social groups that view utility as a right. And in fact, a utility is a monopoly, usually. Why do you have monopolies? Why do you only have one electric company, one gas company, one phone company, one cable company, one water company? Because it doesn't make any sense to run 8 lines of water pipes or 8 lines of electricity to the same building and have you choose a customer, which one you want to be a customer of. So those utilities that have a service that are needed by everybody is usually provided by a monopoly. And what takes the place of competition in a monopoly? It's regulation. So you have federal and state and local governments regulating monopolies. So within an electric utility, that manifests itself in that the utility rates are determined through a formalized rate setting process that has to go through typically a public service commission as the name of it in a state. And in fact, rate setting for utilities is a classic case in finance where you go through an exercise of computing the cost of capital of the company, including the cost of equity and the cost of debt, looking at risk factors, betas, things like that, and coming up with a rate of return that investors want on an investment in utility stock or public company, and extrapolating that all backward to get to rates. And then breaking down all the rates between different classes of customers, like residential customers, commercial customers, industrial customers. So anyway, back to evicted. So I would go through that whole process, and we have a residential customer, let's say they're in an apartment, and they get their utility bill. Nay, they know nothing about this complicated financial process on the back end that determined that bill that came to their house. Well, in fact, they think that electricity is their right. After all, you need electricity to live. And so that's the first problem in terms of people paying their bills. They actually don't think like anything's gonna happen to them if they don't pay the bill. And they're often shocked to learn that their electricity gets turned off eventually if they don't pay. But utilities have gotten a very long process before anybody is disconnected from service. So if you hear of anybody who's disconnected from service, they usually are delinquent anywhere from 4 to 8 or longer months of not paying a bill. So that's a long, long time. So you know when somebody's disconnected, they are way behind in paying their bill. Now here's how regulation comes in. So regulation determines the rates. But let me ask you the first question for your evicted people. Should there be a special rate for people who are poor? So I told you there's commercial rates, residential rates. Heck, Kansas City Power and Light that I had a rate for the amusement park, the Worlds of Fun amusement park rate. We had a rate book that was like 25 pages. Yes, your opinion.
So, I feel like it would be helpful to do stuff like that, but I know because of reading Evicted that they already have regulations in place that protect them. For instance, during the winter, you're not allowed to turn it off because of the protections of their heat and that kind of thing so that they can stay alive during those winter months. So you can't turn it off right before the winter, correct?
That's correct.
So I do feel like because of that, it's going to be less so regulated for cheaper pour rates. But I still feel like it should be something that is there.
Who should pay for it?
It's a good question. That's really the question that it always comes down to, right? Who's going to pay?
That's exactly right. What's that great financial saying? There's no free lunch.
Nothing's truly free.
There is no free lunch. Remember that. So if somebody gets free electricity, somebody else is going to have to pay for it because the costs are fixed, and the variable costs vary with the generation. Just like any other product and service. So if you're going to subsidize one aspect of a population, somebody else has got to pay for it. And you know what? The people who have money don't want to pay for the people who don't equally. So you get a big argument, and those are the things that get fought over in rate cases. And usually what happens is that rather than adjusting the rates, we find a different way to help people who can't pay their bills. We give them grants, we give them credits, we get them through some other programs that'll help them pay their bill. But eventually, some of them still fall through the cracks, a lot of them, and they get disconnected. So out of that 40% I told you that were delinquent at any one time, the amount of disconnections is usually like in the range of 3 to 5%. And to your point, they only happen at certain times of the year, and that manifests this problem through regulation of good intentions, but listen to this scenario, and then this was played out over and over and over and over. My role as the collection person at the utilities. So, what's your name?
Austin.
Austin. So, as Austin said, I hope you were not in this situation. You read this from me, Victor. So, especially if you're in a northern state, and Arkansas is probably at least the beginning of this for most states, when the temperature goes below freezing, and there's different rules in different states. Basically, utilities cannot disconnect service. That was the original rule, and then it would start around November 15th or December 1st, and it'd go to March 1. And then it was open season the whole rest of the year. As March 1, utilities were like bringing in all the workers and disconnecting everybody, because you know what? Nobody paid their bill all winter. Now, you go like, so this is not, difficult to understand. So that people don't have a lot of money, they don't have to pay their utility bill anymore because there's a regulation that says, oh, if it's cold. And by the way, that's been modified over the years, so now that it's not just if it's below 32 degrees, it's a solid moratorium now in most states. It's been converted, so there is no disconnection between those dates. And then furthermore, after that happened, just in the last 10 years, blame this on global warming if you subscribe to that. It gets pretty dang hot in the summer too, doesn't it? So now we have moratoriums in the summer because we can't turn off people because they would lose their air conditioning, and that would be dangerous to people too. So now there are hot temperature moratoriums on disconnections. So what's the impact of that? You can drill right through it. I mean, delinquencies go up, more people don't pay their bills, and so it gets manifested in the rate structure, and it gets passed through in rates to everybody else to compensate for that loss. So utilities are kind of interesting that they have this ability basically to kind of take losses and shift it to other customers, like you may not be able to do in a competitive business. But that's all because of the monopoly and having to get a rate of return that's allowed by regulators. So that said, I didn't really want to go through completely the utility industry way of looking at things, but I do think it's interesting and gives you perspective just how many people are out there that are in danger. And when I talked to the business finance class this morning, I went through these takeaways that I hoped everybody get about personal finance to keep people out of those situations, which are really just for people like you that are, let's characterize you as in a good place. You're all in college, so you got resources to be here. You all dress nice. I'm sure you got a transportation and so forth. You have everything at your disposal that a lot of these people don't have because of where they came up through. And so there's this systemic problem of perpetuation of poorness. And I don't have an answer for it. It's just, like I said, a societal problem on how you address this. And what our government usually does is uses subsidies to help the poor through rent abatements or tax credits on their taxes if they owe taxes, things like that. So one of the things that I wanted to show you to get in a little bit more on a finance topic, I'll use the whiteboard because it's a little complicated, but in 1986, the Tax Reform Act of 1986 put in place a law that incented developers to construct what was termed affordable housing, which is, I think, reading the synopsis of that evicted book, is one of the primary takeaways, is that our nation needs affordable housing. And what's an affordable housing would mean what to you? Rent that you could pay, perhaps? You don't know. What zip code is this, doctor?
Well, technically, 72467.
72467?
That's the university post office. So go 72401 would be Jonesboro, Jones.
72401.
Zip code?
That's cool. Zip code. You want a different one? I got them all.
72112.
I don't have that one. Go back to your sandwich. So HUD publishes what are called fair market rates for every metro. Believe it or not, Jonesboro is in a metropolitan area in the United States. So in 72401, what do you think is the fair market value of an apartment here in Jonesboro, according to the government, or should be?
By annual rent or monthly?
Monthly.
650.
550.
$810.
Go.
That is what the market rent is in that zip code, according to the United States. And if it isn't there yet, it will be soon. I know in Kansas City, I know people who graduate from college and work for us. They're paying $1,000 and $1,200 a month in rent in Kansas City. And in New York, you're going to pay Lord knows what. So who in the world, I look at that and I'm like, who in the world can afford rent like that? I own a house. I've owned a house for decades. And I look at stuff like that and I'm like, who the heck would even rent? Why don't you buy something with interest rates low, which is a lot of people are doing. That's what's driving the market on housing prices to go like this. So housing prices are going up at the same time. We have rent prices going up. So let's get back to the rent. So anyway, this. So the dilemma is we want to build affordable housing. So, I mean, one approach would be for the United States government to raise taxes and, give a few $1 billion to communities across the United States and say build some apartment complexes. but gee, how does that work in our free market enterprise where who's gonna collect the rent? What are you gonna do? What if somebody doesn't pay the rent on those? What if somebody destroys the apartment? Is that fair game to evict them? I don't know, you get all these things here. So the government stays out of that. So all they wanna do is maybe to throw a little bit of solution on this is how would we incent private industry and developers to build more affordable housing? And this is what came out of the Tax Reform Act of 1986. And my company and a lot of utilities embraced this legislation, and it involved tax credits. And as I said this morning, when we're talking about tax policy, you know, the federal government uses tax policy to influence the citizens to do something maybe they wouldn't do otherwise. You know, if you get a tax break, you'll do something that you maybe wouldn't have done without it. So that's really the genesis of this low-income affordable housing plan that came out of the Tax Reform Act of 1986. So it generates on tax credits. Who can tell me the difference between a tax credit and a tax deduction? Anybody know? You've done your taxes yet? You can't answer. You've had 3 questions. You can't either. So I don't want you to give your sandwich away anymore. Anybody have an idea? Who's an accountant? Nobody? Good. I bet you know.
Oh, me?
I'll just let them all do it. A tax credit, when you go compute your taxes, you'll know this soon enough. A tax credit is like a 1-for-1 credit against your taxes. A tax deduction is just a deduction in the computation of your how much you can deduct till you get to the level of income you're going to be taxed on. So a tax credit is much more valuable to a taxpayer than a tax deduction. So if I have a $1,000 tax bill and I get $300 in tax credits, my tax bill is now $700 versus a deduction. So anyway, this is a little complicated, but not really if you listen to me, the expert up here. So this is what was devised in response to this affordable housing incentive in 1986. It has been very, very successful up until the last 10 years. And I'll explain why that changed in a minute. But this actually came out of a financial group in Boston that made a cottage industry of packaging deals to investors all over the United States to invest in affordable housing. And utilities had a interest in this because there was a community betterment side to it. If we invested in housing in our own communities that we serve with electricity, then we would have more customers, and then also we would be a good corporate citizen addressing corporate housing or addressing affordable housing concerns in the communities we serve. But the real reason was tax credits. So utilities generate a tax burden, and a tax credit is a direct credit against a tax, the income tax. And we paid 0 income tax for a number of years because of this program. And I said this morning too, when we were talking about tax policy, you read a lot of stuff in the newspaper. In fact, I was just in Dr. Washington's office, they had an article in one of the Wall Street Journals that is delayed from last week that you had there that I'm reading anyway. And it was talking about who was on, there was a column about the zero payer list. You know, like they got a big X black mark on these corporations that don't pay any taxes. And one of them was DTE Corporation, which is Detroit Edison Electric Company. Well, I'm here to tell you that there's probably a good reason they don't pay taxes, and maybe it's a very good reason that you don't even know when you hear this snippet in the public domain about these terrible companies, because they were incentivized not to pay any taxes to do something good. So out of this 86 tax reform, basically companies got a tax credit for investing in affordable housing. But how they got the tax credit was kind of how you got the, the juice for the squeeze here. It was complicated. Companies didn't go out and build affordable housing themselves. Kansas City Power and Light had no expertise to go build an apartment complex and collect rent, as I said earlier. So a financial mechanism was constructed basically out of this Boston think tank to market tax credits to companies in the United States. So first of all, they set up a limited partnership. Have you guys had your core business organization courses yet? So you have a single proprietorship, a partnership, a corporation. So you set up a limited partnership, okay? A limited partnership has one general partner and an unlimited number of limited partners that have limited liability. This general partnership would be formed, and then they would sell where this the general partner owned 1% of the limited partnership, and a bunch of limited partners were solicited, companies like Kansas City Power and Light, to buy in aggregate the other 99%. So let's just make this simple. Let's say there were 4 companies that invested in this partnership, and each one invested the same amount. So each one owned 25, well, actually, because of the 1%, it's 24 point, whatever the math is, but I want to make it easy for you to think about this. So 25% of the partnership is owned by the limited partner. Whatever company it is, these are different companies. And then the limited partnership would create another limited partnership. And these things were called Tier 1 and Tier 2 partnerships. And the second limited partnership also had a 1% and a 99% ownership structure. This 1% at the Tier 1 was like, I'm going to call it the Boston Fund people. These guys that made an industry in doing this, and they did call themselves Boston Fund at one point. So they create this limited partnership. They now have 4 ownerships of limited partners. Then they go out and they find developers who are building apartment complexes across the United States. And those developers own a 1% share of this limited partnership, and the other 99% is owned by this partnership. Follow that? So 100% ownership, 1% is a developer of an apartment complex, and the other 99% is the limited partnership that's up here. Then this limited partnership would go out. This is a developer, and they build an apartment complex. So I don't know. We'll call it Sunny Point Apartments here in Jonesboro. And this Sunny Point apartment complex costs $10 million to build. The financing for this construction of this apartment complex was financed through, a good part of it was financed, or the goal of this tax law, to finance 70% of it with tax credits. And how did that work? So this developer had to go to what was called a housing, well, it's different in every state, housing authority, governmental agency in every state that had one, created by the federal government, to allocate tax credits to eligible projects. So look, I don't know, what's the, Hogue Brown, is that the guy locally? Hague Brown, whatever that. So let's say, I see stuff, he seems to be the big developer in town. So he goes over to Little Rock and he sits down and fills out an application with the Arkansas Housing Authority, whatever they're called, Says, I want to build this apartment complex for $10 million in Jonesboro, have it be for affordable housing. And affordable housing, by the way, is not the same as, you've heard of Section 8 housing. Section 8 is completely subsidized. This is Section 42 housing or affordable housing, where it just means reduced rents based upon the mean income or median income in an area. So it's really like a different concept. Therefore, affordable, not free, just reduced rent so that you don't have to pay that, whatever it was, $850 a month, that your fair market value of rent is. So he goes over to Jonesboro, he along with all the other developers in Arkansas, and they all make their pitch because Arkansas only has so many tax credits allocated to it from the federal government. And the federal government allocated tax credits based on the population of a state with a little table. So it was like, oh, I don't know, there's 5 million people in, I don't know, 4 million people in Arkansas, 3 million people, and they get $4 a tax credit or whatever. So we have 16 million in tax credits to divvy up to developers, and they pick who it is, and these guys then are allocated these tax credits. This whole concept then was to take the tax credits that were awarded down here by the federal government. So when I'm talking about a tax credit, I'm talking about a federal tax credit. These are from the United States government. So when you fill out your 1040, you get to your tax, you subtract your tax credits on that form. Very valuable. So these tax credits that were awarded flowed up to the tier 1 owners just simply by going up in a reverse waterfall. Call this a waterfall of funds. So the tax credits kind of flowed back up to the ultimate owners of this complicated structure. So here's Kansas City Power and Light, Evergy, whatever, holding 25% of this limited partnership at the tier 1, and we would get 25% of the tax credits that were allocated by Arkansas to this one project. And this limited partnership could replicate that. They could go and build all kinds of apartment complexes. And this fund could replicate it, and did, where they have different LPs with different developers. And so these things got really complicated. As I said, we invested $100 million in affordable housing, our company alone. And what we used it for was to offset our federal tax credit, and we paid no taxes. Coming back to my speech about when you see that companies don't pay taxes, there may be a good reason why they don't pay any taxes. So just don't, understand what you hear. People pick and choose what they want to put out in the soundbox.
Are they able, so they get profit off of this stuff after they make the tax credit investment, and then are they able to make money off of it? How does that work?
No, the way this was structured, so if you were an investor, I'm thinking you're talking about my company,
Yes.
right? The only thing that they got out of this deal was the tax credits.
Okay.
But they paid for the tax credits. So here's where the economics came in. Thank you for the setup here. So a tax credit is $1, all right? When these developers started this and they started selling participation in the limited partnership, effectively the cost of a tax credit was between 50 and 60 cents. So for every dollar we invested, we got basically that back plus the difference of what you paid. So, the difference between what you paid and what the tax credit was. So you made profit, if you will, of 50, 40 cents on the dollar. These things flew like hotcakes out the window. And affordable housing projects were built all over the United States, and it was very successful. I remember I told you things kind of reversed along the way. Well, what happened? So, I mean, this is a good policy, right? You got affordable housing constructed for all these people in the evicted book that need affordable housing, notwithstanding that maybe they didn't pay their utility bills and they're still going to get evicted, but we have maybe satisfied this part of the affordable housing. What eventually happened is that one thing that I probably didn't put in any of my slides in any of the any presentation yet that I'm going to do while I'm here, but I strongly think about it. Regulation from federal government drives all kinds of expenses and problems eventually. So what happened is regulation and changes to this in the tax code overran the benefits, and it's basically kind of hurt the program where it's not attractive to anybody but a bank for certain reasons. So what happened in the rules is that these tax credits had to be used, or they were allocated over a 10-year period. So my company will say was allocated $1 million. I'm just throwing a number out here. $1 million of the 10 million tax credits. I know that's only 10% of it. 2.5 million, whatever it should be. That 2.5 million tax credits was allocated evenly over 10 years for each project. And then the rules, whoever thought this up though, when they wrote this law, said that the tax credit goes for 10 years, but you have to maintain the apartment complex as affordable housing for 15 years. It just got extended and extended. And in some jurisdictions, it got extended to 30 years. So everybody that invested in this thing the reason they invested in it was the tax credit. So at the end of year 10, they got all their credits, and they were like, that was all they were interested in. Yet, they minimized the real estate risk for all you real estate majors, and you're still a part owner in this limited partnership that owns a property for 15 or 30 years. And you can just imagine, let's pretend you're a landlord. What do you think happens to your apartments after 15, 30 years? You get a little worn down. You're renting to low-income individuals who, we're not going to say, but let's just say maybe they don't take care of this property. And so this thing sort of collapsed under the weight of not having a way to maintain the apartments and keep them up to date. So when they originally thought this through, they thought, oh, kind of like at 15 years, we'll just bulldoze the apartments and start this whole process over. Well, that really didn't happen. So you had companies like me sitting up here where it's now year 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15, and we start getting capital calls from the developers of these individual apartments saying we need money to, replace the roof, or we have a tornado that went through and our insurance didn't cover it all, whatever. And so suddenly my investment, which was just, I'm gonna get tax credits, I'm now having to put money back into the partnership because I'm obligated as an owner to do this. So everybody minimized what I call the real estate risk of that investment. And then the other thing that happened is the price of a tax credit was no longer in that 50 to 60 cent range. As demand for these went, we have a supply and demand equation, the price of that developer, or the price that investors were willing to pay for a tax credit was driven higher and higher and higher, because after all, if you pay 99 cents and get $1 tax credit, there's a rate of return right there. So that's exactly what happened. Tax credits ended up ballooning to be in that range of, with low interest rates as they are now, close to $1. So there's no incentive for anybody to get into this sort of project anymore. And we do still have some affordable housing projects being constructed because banks are still incentivized a little bit to do this structure because they have a law that's called the CRA, Community Reinvestment Act, that this qualifies under where they have to reinvest in their community. So, so there you have it. The other thing that was interesting in this was that some of these state housing credit authorities also, through state legislation, authorize state tax credits. So this was a federal tax credit, but the state authorized a tax credit as well, and often matched the federal tax. And so we in Missouri, I don't know if Arkansas did it, Missouri did it, and depending again on the state legislation, the state tax credits either had to be sold to an investor with the federal tax credit, or they could be bifurcated or sold separately. And if they were bifurcated, if somebody had that much foresight, which Missouri did, then you had a separate industry sort of selling only state tax credits. And that would be important because what if you're an out-of-state developer, and so you're in Arkansas and you want to build a apartment complex in Missouri, but you don't have any taxable income in Missouri because you're based in Arkansas, and so a state tax credit from Missouri is not going to be of value to you. So you sell it to somebody else where it is of value, and you get extra return from that. So I didn't know that I would get into this. 12:48. I'm stopping. Okay, so now let's talk about anything you want. Do you understand that? Kinda, sorta.
It actually did help. I read the book as well, I'm an instructor, but that did help a lot, especially with the corporate component and the energy.
For evicted.
Yes.
Are you Carrie?
Yes, I am. So that helped me. I don't think that did help me.
I just think, critically, for students to read, so I always just proclaim this. I mean, what you see in here, especially in media and stuff, is not always accurate at all. And they're, policy statements that come out of the government, and things as complicated as this, take time to understand. And so, you do appreciate, I'd say this, so I've been involved in politics, and at AFP, I was in charge of their political action committee, and you heard that I testified before Congress, so yeah, I like to, put my stamp on the hill. So, you'll hear people about there's no rationale to have lobbyists, things like that. There sure as heck is, because who gets elected in government but farmers and this, somebody who doesn't have any sort of knowledge about this. So what are called, people like lobbyists that come to Capitol Hill and talk to people about making laws. We can make sure that they understand these sort of intricacies and don't trip up. So lobbyists have a function. Just my example again of be a critical thinker. Don't listen to everything you say is bad. There's usually a reason why something's always there. One of the things that I always enjoy doing is history tends to repeat itself. There's like a circle of life. This has no connection whatsoever, but I always think about this. So, if you ever listen to music, go back when you have a favorite song and see how many songs are recycled. Like if you have Sirius Radio and you can go listen to the 60s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, you'll hear a song that is today, and then you'll maybe go back to the 60s and it was the same dang song and you didn't know it. You thought it was a new song. It's like all this stuff just circles around, just like I was thinking about retail this morning and malls. I totally believe there'll be a day that everything will come back when everybody's sick and tired of online shopping and wants to try on clothes again. Now, I hope that wasn't anything I said.
No, think about 1 o'clock class.
I have a 1 o'clock class, but I'm
One
gonna
o'clock
take
class is coming up.
Okay, all right, I'm done. Anybody have any questions? Thanks for your indulgence. I tend to talk.
Just out of curiosity, is it not a good investment for companies, especially like yours, utility companies, to invest in stuff like that? Because you're investing in your future customers and you're increasing demand for your own product in a direct way.
Are you in the investments class?
I'm not.
Okay, well, I'll answer that question there. But it's all about the money
Yeah.
and the required return.
Mhm.
So you don't get a required return. It's not.
Gotcha.
That's a simple answer.
So even though it might increase and it might help out, there's not a direct way to prove that it does, or a direct way that says that it is actually positively impacting the business?
So every business, including banks, has a rate of return expectation, and that's what they strive for. And so if you're not, I'm
If
not
that's
saying
not
this
meeting it.
doesn't work, but it isn't done.
It doesn't
because
meet
it
that
doesn't
criteria.
meet that hurdle.
Absolutely, I understand.
Okay,
There's a scan up here. You don't have to sign it.
thank you all.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you so much.